I recently discovered my parents knowingly let a convicted sex offender babysit me and my brother throughout our childhood, and now they're acting like I'm the unreasonable one for being upset. For context, my parents are downsizing to a smaller home now that they're getting older, and I've been helping them sort through decades of accumulated stuff. Last weekend, I was going through boxes in their attic when I came across a collection of old letters between my parents and someone called Brother Michael from their church. These letters dated back to when I was around 8 years old. I probably should have respected their privacy and just boxed them up without reading, but something about the formal tone of these letters made me curious. What I found made me literally sick to my stomach. These letters revealed that Uncle Ted had been arrested for possession of child sexual abuse material before he ever started watching us. Let me be clear, my parents knew this. They knew, and they still left us alone with him for years. From what I could piece together, my parents were extremely devoted members of a religious community that emphasized redemption and restoration. According to these letters, they had agreed to help guide Ted back to the right path by including him in family activities, despite knowing about his conviction. Brother Michael had encouraged this arrangement as part of Ted's healing journey, though he did suggest certain reasonable precautions that my parents apparently completely ignored. I sat there in their attic for nearly an hour, trying to process what I was reading. Memories of all the times Ted would babysit us, taking us to the park, having us sit on his lap for stories, bathing us when we were younger, came back. I felt ill thinking about it. Still do, Thaba. I took the letters downstairs where my parents were sorting through kitchen items. I placed the letters on the dining room table between us. "You knew," I said. "You knew what he was, and you still left us alone with him for years." My mother reached for my hand, which I pulled away. "Honey, you don't understand. Ted made a mistake, but he was working on himself. Nothing ever happened to you or your brother." The conversation quickly escalated. My parents insisted they were doing what they thought was right, that people can change, and that I was dredging up ancient history that doesn't matter now. My father became increasingly agitated, claiming that I was being unforgiving and worldly in my judgment, using language from their religious community that had always been used to silence questioning. I told them point blank that I would not allow them unsupervised time with my daughter anymore. My mother burst into tears, and my father accused me of being vindictive. I left soon after, feeling extremely upset, still kind of do. Driving home, I called my brother. He reacted with stunned silence before admitting he wasn't entirely surprised. This floored me. He confessed that he struggled with anxiety and panic attacks since college, but never understood why, and now wonders if there might be connections to our time with Uncle Ted. He mentioned nightmares he's had for years that his therapist linked to possible childhood trauma, but he never made the connection until now. That conversation with my brother broke something in me. I've always been the one to smooth things over in our family, to be the peacekeeper. But now, I feel like my entire childhood was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. The people who were supposed to protect me knowingly put me in danger, and now they're expecting me to just get over it. Since the confrontation, my parents have been calling constantly. They alternate between tearful apologies about how they didn't know any better and defensive justifications about how they were following the church's guidance. Other family members have started weighing in too, most of them pressuring me to forgive this one lapse in judgment for the sake of family harmony. There's a family reunion coming up in a few weeks that everyone expects me to attend and make peace with my parents. My aunt called to suggest that I keep the peace by attending, but not making a scene about ancient history. The thought of sitting across from them, pretending everything is fine while they get to play loving grandparents to my daughter, makes me ill. The migraines I've managed since my 20s have returned. I'm taking medication that makes it difficult to care for my daughter while my husband is at work. My body seems to be reacting to this betrayal in ways I can't control. After some thought, I decided to reach out to my mother's youngest sister, Aunt Claire. She's been estranged from the family for years, for reasons no one ever discussed. I drove 2 hours to meet her at her home yesterday, noting that there were no religious symbols or church materials visible. Aunt Claire served tea, listening quietly as I explained the situation with Ted and my parents' reaction to being confronted. When I finished speaking, she set down her cup and said, Your parents did the same thing with brother David when I was 14. I froze in confusion. She revealed that another church member had been caught being inappropriate with young girls, but the church handled it internally, with the man doing community service for the congregation while being spiritually counseled. Despite this man's known behavior, my parents had allowed him to drive Aunt Claire home from youth events and give her private faith mentoring, ignoring her discomfort until she finally told a school counselor about his advances. I listened in horror as Aunt Claire described how the family had closed ranks, accusing her of exaggerating and seeking attention, with my mother suggesting her sister had encouraged the man's behavior. Your mother chose the church's reputation over her own sister, Aunt Claire said quietly. I moved out at 17 and they told everyone I was troubled and turning away from faith. I drove home, now understanding that my parents' behavior isn't just a one-time lapse in judgment, but a pattern of prioritizing their religious community's appearance over their children's safety. Their reactions to my confrontation, the defensiveness, the minimizing, the rallying of family members to pressure me, it's exactly what they did to Aunt Claire all those years ago. That evening, I received a lengthy email from Brother Michael suggesting that my campaign against my parents is being driven by worldly influences and offering to arrange a special prayer session before the reunion. I didn't respond, but I forwarded the email to my brother along with a summary of what Aunt Claire revealed. This finally prompted my brother to call me, as he admitted he's been having nightmares about Ted for years, but didn't want to create problems. We agreed to meet privately before the reunion to discuss how to handle the situation together. He's finally acknowledging that he's been trying to minimize his feelings to avoid dealing with what they might mean. Meanwhile, my parents continue to tell family members that I'm making wild accusations. They're actively misrepresenting my concerns to turn family members against me, just like they did with Aunt Claire decades ago. The more they defend their actions, the more convinced I am that I'm making the right decision by protecting my daughter from them. I know this has been incredibly long, but I feel completely blindsided by all of this. I'm struggling with how to move forward, knowing they put their church's reputation above our safety then, and they're still doing it now. Am I wrong for feeling betrayed by my parents' choices and wanting to protect my daughter from them? I appreciate any honest feedback, even if it's not what I want to hear. Now for the first update. Wow, I did not expect my last post to blow up like it did. Thank you all for the support and validation. It's honestly made me feel less crazy about this whole situation with my parents and Uncle Ted. It's been a week since I confronted my parents about knowingly letting a convicted sex offender babysit us, and things have been complete chaos. My parents have been calling non-stop, cycling between tearful, "We're so sorry you feel this way" apologies, not actual apologies, mind you, and defensive, "We were following the church's guidance" justifications. They behave as if they're the victims because I'm judging their past decisions. My brother has been a mess too. He immediately scheduled 3 emergency sessions with his therapist after our conversation, the one where he mentioned his nightmares. He called me after his second session and told me he's been discussing certain uncomfortable memories he's always had about Ted, but dismissed as normal childhood stuff. He didn't go into details. Honestly, I'm grateful. I'm barely holding it together as is. But hearing him talk about working through this made me realize how much this has affected us. The family reunion is now just 3 weeks away, and the pressure to attend is ramping up. My dad's sister called yesterday to check in on me. Translation, make sure I won't ruin the reunion. She literally suggested I keep the peace by attending, but not making a scene. She kept saying things like, "What good does dwelling on the past do?" I wanted to scream. My chronic migraines have returned. For those asking in the comments, yes, I've had them since my 20s, and yes, they're often triggered by stress. They've been so bad, I've had to take my heavy-duty medication that makes me foggy and dizzy. My husband had to take 2 days off work this week because I couldn't safely care for our daughter while medicated. He's supportive, but worried about me, which just adds guilt to everything. After some discussion with my husband, who many of you correctly guessed is 100% on my side, I agreed to meet my parents at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, to talk things through. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd had time to reflect and might understand where I'm coming from. Spoiler alert, I was wrong. So wrong. I arrived at the coffee shop 5 minutes early and immediately spotted my parents at a corner table. They weren't alone. Sitting with them was Brother Michael, now in his 70s but still an elder at their church. This was not a conversation. They confronted me. My mother smiled when she saw me. "Honey, we thought Brother Michael could help facilitate healing since he knew Ted during that difficult time." I hadn't even sat down when Brother Michael started in. "The church has always believed in restoration and second chances. Ted had repented sincerely for his actions. He referred to possessing child sexual abuse material as a mistake. I sat down anyway, mistake number 1, and tried to stay calm. I explained why I felt my daughter isn't safe around people who showed such poor judgment regarding a sex offender." Brother Michael leaned forward. "We must be careful not to hold on to unforgiveness. Your parents made decisions based on the information and guidance they had at the time. The information they had was that Ted was convicted of possessing explicit images of children. That was the information. And they still gave him unlimited access to their own children." I pointed this out, and my father's face turned red before he loses his temper. "Nothing happened to you. You were fine. You're making this about you when it has nothing to do with you." That's when I asked the question that made the whole coffee shop go quiet. I asked if they had ever considered that nothing happened might not be true. My mother immediately burst into tears. Brother Michael suggested I was being deliberately hurtful and needed to consider the pain I was causing. I stood up and told them this meeting had only confirmed my decision to limit their access to my daughter. They still didn't grasp the severity of the risk they put their children in, and I couldn't trust them with my child's safety. As I walked out, my father called after me that I was destroying the family with these accusations and that my brother isn't making this kind of fuss about the situation. Side note, several people in the comments suggested recording conversations with my parents. Great idea in theory, but my state has 2-party consent laws, so I couldn't legally record them without their knowledge. But I did immediately write down everything that was said when I got to my car. When I got home, I had a text from my brother saying our parents had called him, claiming I had accused Ted of molesting us at the coffee shop. That is not what I said. I simply pointed out that they couldn't know for certain nothing happened. It became clear that my parents are actively misrepresenting my concerns to turn family members against me. My brother was pretty upset, saying he didn't appreciate being involved in this when he's trying to work through things with his therapist. I apologized for them bringing him into it and suggested we maybe talk before the reunion to get on the same page. He agreed, but sounded hesitant. I've spent the last 2 days thinking about what many of you said in the comments about cutting contact completely. Thank you for all the resources on estrangement and healing. I've been reading everything. I'm still not sure that's the right move yet, but after the coffee shop meeting, I'm moving in that direction. The hardest part right now is seeing how my parents are changing the narrative. To hear them tell it, Ted was just a man who made one mistake. Their church advised them it was fine to have him around children, and I'm bringing up past issues to hurt them. Each time they retell the story, Ted becomes more innocent, their actions more justified, and I become more unreasonable. For those who asked about my therapy situation, yes, I've reached out to my old therapist and have an appointment next week. I'm also looking into support groups for adult survivors of childhood endangerment, thanks to the commenter who suggested this. I didn't even know these existed. My husband suggested I talk to Aunt Claire, Mom's estranged sister, before making any decisions about the reunion or cutting contact. He reminded me that she's been through something similar with the family and might have insights. I'm considering reaching out to her, though I'm nervous about opening more issues. The family pressure keeps building. 2 cousins and an uncle have messaged asking me to let go of past issues for the sake of family harmony. Apparently, maintaining the appearance of a perfect family is more important than addressing the fact that my parents knowingly exposed their children to danger, then lied about it for decades. I'm still planning to attend the reunion with my husband, but without our daughter, if only to ensure my parents can't further distort what I've said. My brother thinks it's a mistake and that I should take some time to cool off, but I feel like not showing up will just give them more reasons to portray me as unreasonable. Edit, for clarity. Some people in the comments are asking about Uncle Ted's current status. As far as I know, he eventually married a much younger woman from the church. She was 16 when they started dating, and he was in his 40s and moved to another state. My parents lost touch with him after that, though from what I gathered, it was because of the age gap in his relationship, not because of his conviction. This makes it worse to me. They were fine with him being around children, but set the boundary at him dating a teenager. I keep thinking about all the commenters who shared similar stories about religious communities protecting abusers. It's horrifying how common this seems to be. I grew up believing our church was different, special somehow. Finding out it followed the same methods as all these other organizations that sheltered predators has shaken my faith completely, what little was left of it anyway. Thank you again for all the support and advice. It's meant more than you know during this situation. I'm cautiously hoping that attending the reunion will give me some closure, even if it doesn't repair my relationship with my parents. More updates to come after I meet with Aunt Claire and figure out my next steps. Now for the second update. Update 2. I wasn't planning on writing another update about the situation with my parents and Uncle Ted, but things have escalated in ways I never anticipated, and I need some perspective. First off, thank you all for the overwhelming support on my previous posts, which apparently got removed by mods for some reason, but I think it's still visible on my profile. It's been 2 weeks since that disastrous coffee shop ambush, and things have somehow gotten even worse. My parents have gone into full damage control mode, calling every family member to spin their version of events. According to my cousin, they've been telling everyone I'm making wild accusations about abuse that never happened. They've completely twisted what I actually said, which was simply questioning how they could be so certain nothing happened when they deliberately put us in harm's way. The family reunion is now just a week away, and tensions are high. My parents announced they've invited Brother Michael to attend to help address the rift in the family. Translation, to help gaslight me in front of everyone. Several relatives have reached out urging me to keep the peace and respect my elders, as if respecting elders should trump protecting children from predators. My migraines have gotten so bad, I had to see my doctor yesterday. She prescribed stronger medication and actually advised me to consider the health consequences of attending such a high-stress event. My husband is very worried about me, which just adds to my guilt. He's been picking up all the slack with our daughter while I've been basically non-functional some days. After talking it through with my husband, I decided to reach out to my mother's younger sister, Aunt Claire. She distanced herself from the family years ago for reasons nobody ever discussed. She was just labeled the troubled one who turned away from faith. I always liked her when I was little, but we lost touch after she moved away. It took some digging on social media to find her, but I eventually got her number through a mutual connection. When I called and explained who I was, there was this long pause before she said, "I've been waiting for this call for years. Not gonna lie." We arranged to meet at her home about 2 hours away. My husband stayed with our daughter while I made the drive yesterday. The whole way there, I kept wondering if I was making a mistake and causing more conflict. Aunt Claire lives in a cottage with a garden. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was the absence of any religious symbols or church materials, a stark contrast to every other family member's home. She served tea in her garden, and I found myself revealing everything. The letters about Ted, my parents' small reaction, the church's involvement, all of it. She listened quietly, occasionally nodding as if nothing I was saying surprised her. When I finally ran out of words, she set down her teacup and said, "Your parents did the same thing with Brother David when I was 14. I nearly dropped my cup. She explained that another church member, Brother David, had been caught being inappropriate with several young girls in the congregation when she was a teenager. But instead of reporting him to authorities, the church handled it internally. He did community service for the congregation and received spiritual counseling from the elders. Despite knowing about his behavior, my parents still allowed him to drive Aunt Claire home from youth events and give her private faith mentoring sessions. They ignored her discomfort until she finally got desperate enough to tell a school counselor about his advances. What happened next was almost identical to what I'm experiencing now. The family united against her. They accused her of exaggerating and seeking attention. My mother suggested Claire had encouraged the man's behavior. The church leaders met with my grandparents and advised them on how to handle the situation without involving outside authorities. Your mother chose the church's reputation over her own sister, Aunt Claire said. I moved out at 17, and they told everyone I was troubled and turning away from faith. Most of the family still doesn't know the real reason I left. I drove home in a complete daze. This wasn't just a one-time lapse in judgment with Ted. This was a pattern, a horrifying pattern of my family prioritizing their religious community's appearance over their children's safety. When I got home, I had a lengthy email waiting from Brother Michael. He suggested my campaign against my parents was being driven by worldly influences and offered to arrange a special prayer session before the reunion to help me find clarity and forgiveness. The audacity of this man to lecture me about forgiveness when he helped enable predators makes me very angry. I forwarded the email to my brother along with a summary of what Aunt Claire told me. After 2 days of silence, which had me worried, he finally called. His voice was shaking as he admitted he's been having nightmares about Ted for years, but didn't want to create problems or cause the family to fall apart. He said his therapist has been helping him work through some memories that have been surfacing, but he's been trying to minimize them because facing the full reality is too overwhelming. Edit. I forgot to mention that during my conversation with Aunt Claire, she showed me old church newsletters she'd kept. In one of them from 1995, there was a small announcement about Brother David leaving for a mission opportunity at another congregation across the country. Looking at the dates, this was right after Aunt Claire reported him. They didn't just ignore the problem, they helped him relocate to potentially harm other children. This pattern of moving predators around rather than holding them accountable makes me sick. My brother and I agreed to meet privately before the reunion to figure out how to handle this together. He's been trying to please everyone, going to therapy, but also maintaining a relationship with our parents, and it is clearly causing him a lot of distress. Hearing about Aunt Claire's experience seems to have shifted something for him. He said, "I think I've been in denial because accepting what they did means accepting they weren't the parents I thought they were." Meanwhile, I've gotten texts from 3 cousins and an uncle telling me I need to let go of the past and stop dredging up old issues before the reunion. One cousin actually wrote, "No one's perfect. We all make mistakes in parenting." Apparently, knowingly leaving your kids with a convicted sex offender is just a careless parenting mistake now. I've been reading through all your comments and resources on estrangement. Thank you to everyone who shared links and books. And while I'm not ready to make that decision permanently, I'm giving myself permission to distance myself in whatever ways I need to for my mental health. I'm still planning to attend the reunion, but only because I don't want my parents controlling the narrative anymore. The hardest part in all this is mourning the parents I thought I had. Every new revelation exposes another aspect of the facade. These people who raised me to believe in honesty, protection, and family above all else were willing to sacrifice their children's safety multiple times to maintain their standing in the church. My husband asked me last night if I thought confronting them again would make any difference. Honestly, I don't think it would. They've had multiple opportunities to acknowledge the harm they caused, but they keep doubling down, rewriting history, and making themselves the victims. It's similar to arguing with people who have a different understanding of the situation. I'm going to meet with my brother tomorrow to prepare for the reunion. Having Aunt Claire's perspective has been invaluable. She's offered to attend the reunion with us for moral support. Her first time at a family gathering in over 20 years. I'll update again after the reunion to let you all know how it goes, though I'm not expecting a happy resolution. I'm emotionally drained from all this digging into family secrets, but I promise a final update once the reunion is over and decisions are made about my future relationship with my parents. Now for the final update. Final update on the family reunion and Uncle Ted's situation. First off, thank you all so much for your support through this absolute nightmare. I honestly don't know if I would have had the strength to face my family without your encouragement. It's been 3 days since the family reunion, and I'm just now feeling stable enough to write this update. Honestly, I'm still processing everything that happened, but I promised a final update, so here goes. The morning of the reunion, I woke up with the worst migraine yet. My husband suggested I stay home, but I knew if I didn't show up, my parents would spin it as me causing drama and then chickening out. I took my medication, left our daughter with my best friend, and headed to the park where the reunion was being held. My brother met us in the parking lot. He told me he'd had 3 emergency therapy sessions that week after our conversation about Aunt Claire. He didn't go into details, but he said he was done pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. Aunt Claire arrived about 10 minutes later. I hadn't seen her since I was a kid. She kept saying, "I never thought I'd be here again," and squeezing my arm. When we walked into the reunion area, about 40 family members were already there, clustered in little groups. My parents were standing near the main picnic area with Brother Michael and 3 other church elders I didn't recognize. My mom spotted us and immediately power walked over with a huge fake smile on her face. "We're so glad you came. We've been so worried about you." She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. My dad came over next, saying, "We're ready to put all this behind us and heal as a family." They were already working the crowd too. I overheard my uncle telling someone I was going through something and just needed to come back to faith. I was about to respond when my brother stepped forward. His voice was shaking but clear. "Mom, Dad, I've been remembering things about Ted, things that happened when you left us alone with him." The entire gathering went quiet. My mother's face drained of color, and my father started talking about how this wasn't the appropriate setting for such discussions. My brother continued talking about nightmares he'd had since childhood, specific fears his therapist helped him understand as responses to abuse. Brother Michael tried stepping in, suggesting we take this private conversation elsewhere, but Aunt Claire shut that down immediately. No more secrets. No more protecting people who hurt children. What happened next was wild. The family split in 2 right before our eyes. The older generation looked horrified, but the younger generation started moving closer to us, showing support. My cousin Jessica stepped forward and told everyone she's a mandated reporter and legally obligated to report what she was hearing. She said the church could face investigation for how they handled multiple abuse cases over the years. That's when my father completely lost it. He started shouting about how they did everything the church advised and couldn't have known what would happen. Brother Michael and the other church elders huddled together, looking panicked. They left my parents standing there without their backup. By this point, the reunion was effectively over. Some relatives quietly left, avoiding eye contact with everyone, but others came over to offer support. My mom's brother actually pulled me aside and apologized for pressuring me to keep the peace. He said his own daughter had told him some concerning things about youth group trips with Uncle Ted, but he dismissed them because my parents always insisted Ted was reformed. My parents left without saying goodbye. Aunt Claire, my brother, my husband, and I ended up going to a nearby restaurant where we spent 3 hours talking through everything. Aunt Claire shared more details about Brother David and how the church had helped him relocate to another congregation after her allegations. My brother opened up about memories he's been working through in therapy. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was with family who actually put family first. The aftermath has been intense. My phone has been blowing up with texts from family members I haven't heard from in years. Some are supportive, others are angry that I ruined the reunion. My parents have been calling non-stop, leaving voicemails alternating between threats and tearful pleas. My brother has decided to pursue a formal complaint against the church with documentation of how they handled both Ted and Brother David. 3 of my cousins have come forward with their own stories about uncomfortable encounters with Ted during church events. Jessica told me yesterday that she followed through with her mandatory reporting obligation. She said investigators have already contacted her for a formal statement about what my brother revealed and the church's pattern of covering up abuse. I have no idea what will come of it after all these years, but the fact that someone is finally doing something feels monumental. Edit. I should add that my husband has been my absolute rock through all of this. He took 2 weeks off work to help with our daughter while I've been dealing with these migraines and family drama. When I apologized for putting our family through this, he stopped me and said, "You didn't cause this. You're ending it." As for my relationship with my parents, I've made the difficult decision to go no contact, at least for now. I've blocked their numbers and emails after consulting with a therapist who specializes in family trauma. She helped me see that their response to all of this shows they haven't changed at all. The most surprising outcome is my relationship with my brother. We were never particularly close as adults, But this experience has connected us in ways I never expected. He's coming over for dinner next week, and we're talking about starting some kind of support group for others who've left our former church. I want to thank everyone who encouraged me to reach out to Aunt Claire. Without her perspective and support, I don't think my brother would have found the courage to speak his truth. I'm still amazed at her strength. I don't plan on posting any more updates about this situation, but please know your support made all the difference during one of the hardest periods of my life. To everyone who shared similar stories in the comments, I see you, I believe you, and it wasn't your fault.